if we don't learn how to create communities of supportive trumpet players that allow people to honor the limits that they have, then we're going to keep seeing kids injure themselves. And we're going to keep injuring ourselves. Hey everybody, I'm Ryan Nielsen. This is Ryan's Trumpet. For today's episode, I want to continue our conversation about injury and talk about the psychological side. Over the course of the pandemic, I ended up getting really interested in the nature of trauma. And those studies took me into the writings of people like Peter Levine and Donald Kalsched and Bessel Van Der Kelk and Bruce Perry. But what really struck me about that as I studied it is that the injuries that I've seen my students experience and I experienced could also be understood through this lens of trauma. Gabor Mate frames trauma in the context of two basic human needs which can compete with each other or complement each other. And those two basic human needs are, on the one hand, because we are absolutely helpless as human children, we totally depend on others for our survival. We have an absolute need for meaningful attachment. We are wired to tune into the expectations of those who can keep us alive and to meet those expectations. So that's one basic human need, is attachment. The other human need, Gabor Mate uses the word authenticity to describe that. He's not talking about authenticity maybe the way we see happening in a lot of pop culture today, where people are marketing authenticity. But when he says he's talking about authenticity, he just means an innate connection to our feelings, to the experience of our feelings and our intuition, and the ability to act according to those. Well, this really struck me as interesting because I think that's an accurate way to frame what I've seen in the injuries that my students have sustained and my own injury. And what I mean by that is the psychological side of injuring yourself requires that you ignore, that's not the best word, because we certainly don't do it on purpose, but it means that we override intuitive signals from our bodies in order to do something that we perceive to be an expectation outside of us. When I injured myself, I was playing on teacher chops. I was playing with musicians who I love and admire. I felt that the music around me kind of calling for an intense moment. And yet, for the first portion of our performing together, I could feel that things were off. My body was absolutely communicating with me, saying, trying to get my attention, like, slow down, this isn't working, something's off today. So if you think about it in the context of this framing of trauma, I had this desire to connect in real ways with these musicians around me, that desire for genuine attachment. At the same time, my body was telling me that things were off, something was wrong. It was sending me the signals. And in order to get to that moment of injury, I had to override the cues from my body. I had to ignore them on some level and continue trying to do more than the limits that were placed on me. For me as a teacher, what was really fascinating about this is as students have come to me with injuries and as I've tried to help them through them, I might be able to give them the physical answers to what they experienced, and they might be conscientious about applying the physiological answers or solutions that we come up with together, and then they start getting better again. But then inevitably they will put themselves in a situation where there is a competition between these two basic needs of attachment and authenticity. If to whatever extent they are unable to honor the authentic communication from their bodies in those settings where they feel some kind of attachment pressure, some kind of external expectation, they're going to end up re-injuring themselves, even if the physical tools for their healing are in place and helpful and working. So I think that begs some really serious questions for us as teachers, practitioners, and members of the trumpet community, which is essentially, psychologically, we can see how that's working, but we kind of got to ask ourselves even bigger questions. I think we have to ask ourselves culturally why this is happening as much as it is. How come our community, and the way that we are guiding it, is producing scenarios where students are hurting themselves often? How come our culture leads students into a place where they feel like they have to choose the external expectation over the authentic cues that their bodies are giving them? How come they feel like limits are flaws? How come many of us don't know how to frame our limits as teachers? Because if we partner up with our bodies, if we honor the signals that are being given to us, we're going to stay healthy and we're going to keep growing. Limits become teachers, which we grow beyond. And I think we have a lot to deal with there. These things have become incredibly important to me. I think we have to move towards this as a community. I think we can do a lot better at creating a community that values the most beautiful aspects of what we do and what we love, and continues to encourage and inspire students to dig deep and grow, but that doesn't put them in positions where they feel the pressure to override the authenticity of their body's limits because they feel like they have to meet external expectations just to maintain an attachment relationship to a teacher, a peer. And I also feel like we just don't talk about this enough. But to me, if we don't address this problem of overriding the authentic in order to meet some sense of an external expectation, if we don't learn how to create communities of supportive trumpet players that allow people to honor the limits that they have, then we're going to keep seeing kids injure themselves. And we're going to keep injuring ourselves. There's a cultural and a psychological aspect to the challenge of dealing with injury that just needs to be addressed. And involves a lot of inner work too, of becoming comfortable with ourselves as players and as people. Those are my thoughts, and I will see you in the next episode.